All right, so welcome everybody. Thanks for being here, and just really grateful that you showed up. This is going to be super cool. Trina and I were just talking a bunch beforehand, and I can't wait for you all to hear what she has to say about this. But before we begin, why don't we take a minute to just invite God into this space, and we will start with a prayer. Our Son, Holy Spirit, Amen. Dear Lord, we thank you so much for everything that you have blessed us with, for the ability to gather together for this hour so that we can really learn from each other and support each other. We ask you to bless our technology, that everything goes as planned, and that, again, just to really heal the hearts, minds, bodies, souls of everybody who is here, everybody who will be watching the recording, and even just anybody who wanted to join but wasn't able to or didn't feel comfortable enough to join. We ask that you speak your words through our mouths and just help us to support one another in whatever way that means for each other. We ask this through your Son's name. Amen. In the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. All right. So I know some of you, but to just share a little bit about myself, I am a certified women's health coach. Trina and I actually went through the same program, which was kind of interesting and fun, but I think we just missed each other. So we didn't actually get to see each other when we were in there. I'm also a Billings ovulation method instructor, traditional birth companion, and trauma-informed coach, and spent so much time helping women to heal from challenging traumatic births, and so that they can just go from feeling like broken, overstimulated, or just like what's wrong with me, to feeling comfortable, confident, and secure in God's plan for them. So, Dr. Trina, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hello, everybody. I'm Trina Winter, and I am a pelvic physical therapist. I'm super excited to be here because this is something that is definitely deep in my heart to share. And when I connected, I was like, oh my gosh, we have so much in common. This is awesome. I'm also, like I said, a certified health coach, women's health coach, and like she mentioned, and I also work a lot in the fertility space. I'm a birth doula and a lactation counselor, so I work very closely with moms and babies. And then actually recently in the last year, I've been doing a little bit more training in miscarriage ministry, and that is something that has just really been very passionate for me, because so many people just feel unheard and unsupported in that area, or they keep things to themselves when really they personally really just want to share their story or just kind of be heard and validated too. So working with a couple of ministries locally here in Ohio. And that's been really, really exciting and fun. And it's just been amazing how God has crossed paths with so many different people. And it's just been truly amazing. I've been a PT for over 10 years in the pelvic health, women's health space for at least 7 or 8 years, and really just kind of narrowed down in that niche probably in the last 5 years as well. And I have five kids, just had my 5th about 6 weeks ago. He's sleeping right now, so hopefully he'll stay quiet, asleep. I might have to buzz out real fast to go grab him. We'll see what he does, but I'm very happy to be here.
All right. And I guess I should mention too that I have 5 kids, and yeah. All right. So if you have any questions that you don't want to hold until the end, just put them in the chat and we can answer those as we go through. Or if you want to save them to the end, that's totally fine too. Just to give you a quick overview of kind of what we're going to go through. The first part is going to be looking at the impact of trauma on body and spirit. Then we'll be looking at the beauty of God's design for the body, some simple tools for healing, reclaiming marital intimacy after birth, and then we'll open it up for Q&A and just any reflection that you guys want to offer. Okay, so the first part we're going to talk about is something that is often misunderstood, and this is around birth trauma. And this trauma doesn't just have to be during birth, even though it sounds like it. This can really be anything during pregnancy, birth, or postpartum, or even preconception if things have gone kind of wonky. So trauma isn't just these big scary events. It can certainly be those big scary events, but it's also can be those little T traumas with these things that maybe somebody said something to you, like, oh, just be thankful you have a healthy baby. Or maybe it's that you felt like you weren't listened to, or that your body wasn't your own, or that you feel broken. And it's also again, how we're feeling in the moment. Oh, one second, somebody wants to join. It's how we're feeling in the moment, but also, again, what we've lost in that moment. So for many of us, pregnancy and birth is supposed to be this really joyful time, but sometimes things happen and those leave us feeling like our bodies are still holding on to that pain. Welcome, Abby. And we're just going through a little introduction here. So trauma can manifest in different ways. It can feel like your body is broken, reliving moments that felt out of your control, or maybe that you felt like you weren't listened to. It can feel like you are feeling overstimulated all the time, like you're on edge, like you've just lost the ability to relax. It can also manifest in physical symptoms, which Dr. Trina is going to touch on a lot, which is pain, tension, just feeling off, and you can't really understand why things are feeling off. And then if you are more recently postpartum, or even if you're not recently postpartum, one of those big physical symptoms can also just feel like things are not in the right space, or that they are falling out, or any of those types of words as well. So what's really interesting is that trauma is not just stored in your brain, like a lot of us might think it is. It's really stored in your whole body. So whenever we experience something that's really overwhelming, whether that be a medical intervention that we didn't necessarily want, or just like an experience that happened that you weren't expecting, or even just the intensity of birth, our bodies can really hold on to that stress. And the reason that they do that is to try to keep us safe. So we need to constantly tell our bodies and our brains that there's not a bear chasing us, that we can relax, and that our nervous system can downregulate itself. So just as a really quick example, I had a mom that I worked with named Sarah, and she went through this really hard experience where her labor was like super, super, super long, like days and days of prodromal labor, on and off, on and off. And she ended up eventually going in to the hospital because things were not progressing, and her midwife was like, we need to do something about this. So she went into the hospital and she ended up with an emergency C-section, and she just kept saying afterwards that like her body felt broken, and that led to her also feeling disconnected from her baby, and that led her feeling disconnected from her husband, and then everything kind of just spiraled, and she was snapping at her kids because she had other kids as well. She felt just like overwhelmed and just couldn't keep it together. And unfortunately, many women feel this, especially feeling overstimulated and burnt out after birth, just from the experience itself, but also if you have other little ones or if you have other responsibilities in life. And again, this trauma can show up in many different ways, whether that be like flashbacks, anxiety about being a mom, physical pain that just doesn't seem to go away, or even just spiritual issues where you feel distant from God. So once Sarah started to really like address what was going on physically, emotionally, and spiritually, she was able to feel like herself again. So once again, trauma really impacts your nervous system, and that might be why you're feeling constantly overwhelmed or burnt out, because your body's trying to cope, but something inside of you is telling you that it isn't safe. So I'd love for Trina to talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So I'm loving all of this. It's just amazing. So when we, after birth or any of the traumas that we experience, it's very, very critical for us as women to take the time to heal in both the physical perspective and your mental well-being. And it can be recovering, like she said, from the physical stress of childbirth, something going through preconception, something maybe that has been triggered from your childhood. But also it helps prevent any potential future complications and sets just really a good foundation for a healthy relationship with your family. Part of this recovery really includes a lot of rest, a nourishing diet, gentle exercise, and definitely some emotional support too. So in regards to trauma being just stored in the body, and very specifically pelvic floor, kind of diving into the work that I do, a lot of times it's through muscle tension. So if we're in this fight or flight and we're running from a tiger, we have this protective response to this stress or this trauma, and our bodies kind of tighten up, and our blood is shunted to the organs that need us to survive in that moment. So we need our muscles in our legs to run from the tiger. We need our heart pumping, and we need oxygen. and need to be able to breathe. So blood kind of gets held from other parts of your body. And that includes your pelvic floor. And so when we don't have that blood running to our pelvic floor, we can experience some trauma there because now those muscles are tense. We have no oxygen and blood flow to that area. And that also can impact our digestion and impacts our reproductive organs. So you can imagine just that stress that it has on our body as a woman in our cycles. So that's why when we do some cycle tracking and stress really impacts our cycles. And also from a fertility perspective as well. And then we can hold on to that emotional experience. And then once that experience is over, we can still be in a chronic state of tension and discomfort afterwards. And then sometimes that can manifest as pain. And chronic pain, and whether that is during intercourse, we can have urinary issues. If there's a lot of tension in the pelvic floor, we can have urinary issues, even leakage. So it's commonly thought like, oh, we're having leakage, we must need to strengthen our pelvic floor, when in reality, our pelvic floor is actually overactive, and strengthening can actually cause more harm than good. Constipation as well, because when our digestion is off from the trauma and the stress, or an overactive pelvic floor, and that tension in the pelvic floor can create constipation as well. And then just some general discomfort in the pelvis. We kind of talk about that nervous system, and the role of that is to determine if you feel safe or not, or under threat. It's just your nervous system is always kind of on guard just a little bit to scan your environment and looking whether signs of safety or signs of danger. If you are experiencing a lot of short, shallow breathing, so really right now, just kind of checking in with yourself, checking in with your breath. Are you holding your breath right now? Are your legs crossed? Are you tensing in your jaw? Is your butt clenched? Is your breathing really short and shallow? Because even if we're just sitting here in the comforts of our home, we don't feel like we're being threatened, we feel in a safe spot. But if we are experiencing those types of things in our body where we're shallow breathing, we're kind of holding some tension in our bellies, sucking it in, tension in our jaw, our body still thinks we're under stress and we're running from a tiger, even though, again, you're in the comfort of your own home. So from a physical perspective, we really want to work on softening your body. And your body remembers this trauma. It's kind of like muscle memory, and it continues to kind of brace itself. The pelvic floor itself is a very sensitive area, and it's very connected to our nervous system. And so when we feel that our safety or security is threatened, that pelvic floor can be almost at first to respond. And we don't think about that. I think many women are very disconnected from their pelvic floors, whether that is something from a generational thing because, oh, my mom never talked about having a period. It just kind of happened. And that can be traumatizing for a young girl when they have no idea what's going on with their body during that time. Some children may have experienced any type of emotional trauma as a kid. They may have experienced like a fall, even like a fall on your bike, and you might have like a tailbone injury or something like that. That puts trauma to your pelvic floor. Or maybe, unfortunately, somebody's experienced some trauma, sexual trauma as a young child, or even all the way through your teenage years, college years, all of those types of things. So your pelvic floor is definitely the first to respond. And so when your stress resilience is lowered, or you have unprocessed stress or trauma in your body and your nervous system, that resilience is lowered. And so it can take less of a threat to disrupt your sense of safety. So something as little as somebody saying something to you, or something, even going through a very, beautiful, kind of low key, uneventful birth, that can still, your body can kind of still respond to that as trauma, because maybe your nervous system resilience has been lowered for various reasons. So things can kind of pop up as pelvic pain, incontinence, constipation, pain with intercourse. And those are all things that, yes, we can address physically, but we also want to make sure we're paying very close attention to what the rest of the body's doing. What kind of, trauma, any history of trauma, and how are we handling that from a, emotional perspective? And, maybe we need to pull in some type of counseling services or coaching services. Maybe we need to, have some hands-on work done. Maybe we need to go through some different trauma therapies. But when working in the women's health world and the pelvic floor world, is a very intricate and very interconnected area. And again, the pelvic floor is connected to our entire body. So, if somebody has that pelvic floor tension, I'm also looking in the mouth. I'm looking at the jaw, looking in the mouth, and seeing what's going on there too, because everything's so beautifully connected.
Yes, I love all of that. I was taking some notes too. But I think that maybe it would be helpful, because I forgot that we should probably do this before, to tell people what is the pelvic floor, in case they're not sure.
Yeah. That's a good thing. We just automatically assume people know as women. So pelvic floor is a general area in your pelvis. So pelvic floor muscles is like a hammock. And I should have had my pelvic floor with me. It's at my office. I should have brought that home. That would have been helpful. And so you have a variety of muscles in your pelvic floor. It's not just one muscle. It's a variety of different muscles. And if you think about from your tailbone all the way back to or up to your pubic bone is like a hammock of muscles, and then side to side from your this type of your hip bone from your right to your left, and it's a hammock of muscles. And it also it's there to support our organs. It's there for sexual function. It's there for allowing a passage for childbirth. And we want those muscles to be, we don't want them to be super strong, and we don't want them to be super weak. We kind of want that middle ground, and that kind of like a trampoline. It kind of just ebbs and flows with the pressure of everyday life. And then we obviously have our reproductive organs in there. We have our digestive organs in there, in the pelvis, as well as the colon comes down. So all of that is encased in that pelvic floor. And then from a core perspective, a lot of people just think your core is your belly muscles, but really your core includes your diaphragm, underneath your ribs, your belly muscles, your back muscles, and your pelvic and your hip muscles. So like the whole area is your core. And so we kind of look at that as one, and then how it's connected to the rest of your body.
Yes, love that. I never knew. Well, years ago, I didn't really realize everybody would say your core, and I would just think your stomach until I realized, like, oh, it's actually my back too.
Yeah.
And once I realized that, it was like, oh, that makes sense why my back's hurting whenever I'm doing certain things and why it shouldn't be hurting. And so, yeah. All right. Thanks for explaining that. And I also love the part you said about like strengthening can do more harm than good. Because I know for me, which baby was it? I think it was number 4. I was doing CrossFit very regularly. And I was quite strong. And he was breech and would not flip, like, no matter what happened, or like no matter what I tried to do. And then I basically stopped doing so many workouts, like squats and everything. And he flipped around. But then I also had some serious issues after he was born. And I think it was because I was like too strong or too tight.
Yep.
Because with number 5, I stopped doing CrossFit. I do more like Pilates and bar now, and no issues at all. So I think that's an important thing to say.
Yeah, absolutely. And I see that with a lot of my clients, and even my fertility clients too, that are, really big into the HIIT training, the CrossFit training, all of that. And yes, there's a time and place for it. I used to do a lot of CrossFit, so I'm right there with you. But depending on our season of life and what's going on with our bodies, it's so individualized. It just depends on if that type of exercise is right for you, because exercise is a stress to the body. You can look at it in a good way or not so good way, but for some people who are having fertility issues or having a lot of trauma after childbirth or having a lot of cycle irregularities, sometimes they're over exercising or doing too much exercise that the body can handle. And that's an actual stress to the body. So some people, we look at exercise as a form of stress relief, but for some people, it's actually keeping them in that cycle of stress and trauma. And if they're having a hard time trying to get out of that, sometimes it's like, let's take a break from all this exercise and do more like walking in nature and hiking and, mobility work. And that's hard for people who are used to that high-end energy, exercise as well.
Yes, for sure. All right, why don't we touch on the beauty of God's design? I'll just say a few words on it because I know that you have some really interesting points of view on this. But so our bodies are obviously amazing and beautifully designed. Again, you can touch on the pelvic floor later on. But whenever we do experience any sort of trauma, especially during birth, and by trauma during birth, that can be like an emotionally traumatic thing that happens, but also whenever you're having a baby, like that's a big thing that's changing. So it's in a way is a bit traumatic on your body, not in a bad way necessarily, but it's a big change. And so this area in our bodies can really hold on to so much tension and pain. So it's important to recognize that sometimes we need a little help to unlock the healing that God has designed us for. So whenever we give our bodies that right support, whether that be through gentle exercise, prayer, or having help with the pelvic floor PT, we really can do incredible things. But I think it's important to remember that it is okay to need help sometimes. And it's not, and it doesn't mean that you're weak or that you're bad or anything like that. So do you want to touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, I definitely can. So, from God's design, I mean, he created us man and woman. He created us differently for a reason. And also too, he could have just made us like Adam and Eve, like poof, here we are, but he didn't. And so through the passage of, childbirth, that in itself, I think is just beautiful. How we are conceived, how all of those things are very intricate in regards to his design that, sometimes with the trauma, I feel like there's a lot of spiritual warfare that's happening as well, that it's a hard time to release some of that trauma. And, just honoring our bodies, nourishing our bodies, how God designed. So, I always say God gave us plants, God gave us animals, God gave us this beautiful nature and this food. So what we put in our bodies from a nutrition perspective, really trying to think about how we're nourishing our bodies as God's design and his temple, versus filling our bodies with a bunch of junk. And synthetics and man-made things. Yes, we're not perfect. We're going to eat junk. We're going to do some of those things. But, looking at what kind of foods are truly healing for our bodies is very important. So, from a nutrition perspective, healing, there's a lot of really great resources out there that really talk about the healing properties of food. And then also just from a movement perspective, when a body feels very tense, God gave us these muscles and the ability to move versus just sitting on the couch all day. When we do some different movement patterns, we can really move that trauma too. Because we can have this trauma and this stress kind of stuck in our bodies. And to unstuck, we want to be able to move as well. And there's so many really great exercise programs that bring in the power of prayer with movement. And I think that is so beautiful. Soul Core, I don't know if you guys have heard of Soul Core, but I had the privilege of speaking with the women that started that, and it's such a cool story. But they use the movement and exercise while doing the rosary, and I think that is just so incredibly cool. So you can use kind of that power of prayer with movement to help with your healing. And then just knowing and just having that self-love and that self-compassion and knowing truly who you are as the child of God is so important, because so many of us lose our identity and we feel like our bodies are broken. And I think that's one of the first steps to healing is just honoring that. And we are not broken. We have, God here. And, what is the most important? What does that eternity look like for us? And what are those important things for us to be focusing on? And when we can really accept that and the self-love for our bodies and just loving our bodies for who they are and how God made us, and also just what our bodies have been through, no matter if we've had 1 kid, 10 kids, even if we've had no kids, if we're on that path to motherhood, and depending on what kind of journey that is, or even after a loss, honoring our bodies of how he really designed us is so important, and making that connection.
Yes, for sure. And yeah, if you aren't familiar with Soul Core, it's wonderful. It's a great program and great leaders. It's awesome. As far as other simple tools for healing, one big thing that I'm really bad at doing, but I always tell clients to do, and that I'm trying to get better at doing
Oh,
is
good. You do that
journaling.
too, because I do
Yeah.
the same thing.
Is journaling. It really is so powerful to write down your thoughts and feelings about whether it be your birth experience or just like your day-to-day life. And so the reason for that is because it kind of helps you coach yourself a little bit, where it's like you tell your brain like, okay, this happened, and then you kind of figure out like where it trails off. And one really fun thing that I try to do every day is write down something that my children do that I think is funny or interesting or like that I want to remember. So for each kid, I'll be like, Grace did X, Y, or Z. Patrick did X, Y, or Z. And then that way I can always flip back. So like 2 years ago, I can look back on this day and be like, okay, Grace was running around in her whatever costume doing this funny thing. And so it just is a great way to remember to be like, okay, I did a lot of hard things, but I have a lot of really joyful like blessings in my life as well. So to just kind of reframe that from everything is so hard, but to bring in that, but I have so many blessings, and that's kind of what I'm going to focus on. That's a really great one to do. Another one that I like to do is body scanning. And if you're not familiar with this, it's really simple. It doesn't take very long at all, but it just takes a few minutes to check in with your body. So if you feel comfortable closing your eyes, you close your eyes or do it however you want. Like Trina was saying, you just breathe, which I find myself every once in a while, like holding my breath. And so I'm sure that other people do as well. And just notice wherever you feel any tension or discomfort in your body, because often our bodies will tell us where they need to heal before our minds can actually figure out what's going on. So I think that that's a really powerful one too. Same with prayer and meditation. Obviously, those are pretty important. And I also am really big on self-compassion. So like she was saying, like be kind to yourself. Your brain is so powerful. And if you speak negatively to yourself, that's going to have a ripple effect on your entire body. But if you speak kindly to yourself, even if you don't necessarily believe it, if you just speak kindly to yourself, whether that be like you have affirmations everywhere and you just like force yourself to tell yourself these things, eventually you will start to believe it. I know that sounds impossible, but it really is possible, because healing isn't linear. It's not just going to be like, oh, I'm going to go from A to B. It really is like, it's okay to have bad days, but to remind yourself that you're doing the best you can. And again, keep in mind that your brain is super, super powerful. Plus, if that's really hard for you, just remember, or not even remember, if it's really hard for you to speak kindly to yourself, don't do it for yourself, do it for your kids. That makes it a lot easier.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Any other tools for healing that you wanted to touch on?
Yeah. I love your journaling thing. People tell me to journal all the time, and I just don't ever take the time to do it. Like I'm like you, like, oh, I tell people to do this stuff, but I don't always do it myself. So, I think too, number one is give ourselves grace as well. We're all in different seasons. And that comparison to other moms and women and families are doing is just such a plot from the evil. And it's just a thief of joy. And so, just taking time to identify your values, like what do you love? What do you value? And those can shift and change from season to season, but what are your values? Limit your use of technology as well. I feel like that's a huge thing, because in today's world, we have so much things at our fingertips and we want that instant gratification, that if we can take time to disconnect, to really check in with our bodies, that can be really important. And do something that brings you joy. Pick one thing every day and try to do something very small that brings you joy, whether it's just to enjoy a warm cup of coffee or, oh, finally I got that laundry done. That just gives me so much peace that laundry's done, whatever that means. And prioritize taking care of yourself. I try to avoid the term self-care, because I feel like eventually it does get a negative connotation, or it feels kind of cliche. Like, what does self-care even mean? But like, taking care of yourself, but by really just setting boundaries and knowing that you can say no to things and that is okay. And no is a complete sentence. If you don't feel up to going to a family gathering, if you don't want to volunteer at your kid's school or whatever it may be, giving yourself permission to slow down and just be. I should probably say this is probably one of my number one things is prioritize sleep. And I know with like little kids, it's hard to get good sleep, but we can get really good restful sleep, even if it is interrupted with, children, nursing babies, those kinds of things, and creating that really healthy sleep routine, limiting technology before bed, having a nice calm routine before bed. And this is what I help a lot of clients with, as well. And then kind of looking around your house. I know this is a big trigger for me when I'm feeling a lot of that overwhelm, that nervous system dysregulation, is when my house is very cluttered and disorganized and there is stuff everywhere. Like I have 5 kids, like there's stuff everywhere all the time. And so I realized to minimize, we actually got a dumpster this summer and we filled it. My goal was to fill a dumpster in a week and get rid of, like, ruthlessly purge and just get rid of stuff. And oh my gosh, it just felt like a whole huge weight lifted off my shoulder. So when we do things like that, just to kind of help calm, those kind of things can help calm our nervous system. That can be incredibly helpful. And they seem kind of, sometimes they seem unrelated to like a trauma, but when we can really offload our nervous system, then it allows our body just to have a little more clarity to really help with that healing process. And also, don't be afraid to ask for help and seek help, whether it's from a counselor. And sometimes it's going through a few different counselors or life or coaches of some sort to find the right fit. So don't discredit that area by one bad experience. So really kind of vet them out. Because sometimes what can happen with some type of the traumas, that when you have a pregnancy or a birth, it can stir up earlier life traumas and insecurities from in the past. So when I work with my doula clients, we talk a lot about that, of why are we getting scared about birth? Where does that fear and anxiety come from? What are we, those kinds of things, and really asking them about their past, because those things can show up in the birth space. And we want that birth space to be as safe as possible, because if a birth space doesn't feel safe, that birth process is probably not going to go real smooth. So those are some things like proactively to kind of work on if you decide that you do want more children or have friends and family that are planning to have more children. Those are some really key things that we really talk about. Fortunately, I had a really amazing doula training where I did my doula training through, and we talked a lot about whole person listening. And so really kind of seeking help through that process can be really helpful.
Yeah, so many good little nuggets there for sure. This last part that we're going to talk about can be rather difficult for some women to hear. And this is, again, reclaiming marital intimacy after birth. Mm-hmm. And whenever Trina and I were talking about this, I just loved her perspective that she has, especially coming from like a PT background and just hearing from women. But as you probably know, typically after you have a baby, especially if you have a baby within the medical system, you have 6 weeks of no intercourse or anything like that. And then at 6 weeks, you go to the doctor and then they just say like, okay, you're good to go. And then husbands are usually like, yay, like all happy again. But not all the same. That doesn't always happen for women, because 6 weeks out, it's still very fresh. Your hormones are still kind of wonky, and you might not feel ready for that sort of thing. So reconnecting with your spouse in this way can feel like just another mountain to climb, or kind of just like another thing to check off the list. And it's especially if you're dealing with any sort of physical pain or emotional pain. So again, 6 weeks out, a lot of moms are still saying like, I still don't feel like myself. My body still feels foreign to me. I feel like a cow, like I'm just here for milk, any of those sorts of things. So a lot of moms also will avoid intimacy because they're afraid of any sort of pain, which Dr. Trina will talk about in a second. But marriage is just this really great partnership, and healing doesn't have to be something that you do alone. So I just really want to reiterate that whenever we invite God into this process of healing, it really becomes this opportunity for us to grow in trust and love, not just in our own self, but also for our spouse and for God as well. And also to remember that intimacy isn't just physical. It's about the connection, communication, and feeling safe with your husband. So, Dr. Trina, do you want to touch a little bit about like the physical side of intimacy after birth?
Yeah. So this is a thing that we see commonly. And I feel like a lot of women feel alone, that they are the only ones feeling this way, whether they have fears about pain with intimacy or they are currently experiencing it. And actually, a lot of women experience pain with intercourse prior to even having children. And it's very common even in that area. And that can come for a variety of reasons. So we can have pain with intimacy because of hormones. Our hormones are kind of all over the place postpartum, and we have more of that vaginal dryness, and that can create pain. We can have pain because we have so much pelvic floor tension. We can have pain because we have some type of prolapse going on, which is kind of your bladder, your uterus, your rectum kind of dropping, and it's kind of creating a barrier. We can have pain because we don't feel safe. Our nervous system is kind of on edge. And once we start that intimacy process, that can create a lot of pain too. Or it can be stirring up a lot of things, maybe from our past, if we've had some type of pelvic floor trauma. And pelvic floor trauma can be, something from as far as some type of sexual trauma as a child, or teenager, or wherever in that lifespan, all the way to just a simple fall on our tailbone. That's pelvic floor trauma. And our pelvic floor doesn't really know the difference between necessarily trauma from falling on our tailbone and creating tension in our pelvic floor versus having intimacy and creating tension in our pelvic floor. It just knows there's tension. So working through that. And a pelvic floor physical therapist can be a really wonderful, wonderful tool to help decrease and get rid of that pelvic pain with intimacy. That is something that I can't stress enough. And fortunately, there's a pelvic floor therapist, more and more of them out there, because more and more women and therapists are realizing the importance of the work that we do. If you have trouble finding one in your area, let me know. I'm happy to connect you. I have colleagues all over the United States that I can find people. And sometimes people have a bad experience with a pelvic floor therapist and they don't ever want to go back to one. And that is very valid. However, we're not all the same. We all have different types of training. We all have different types of skill sets. We all have different beliefs. So finding one that you really connect with is really important. And that is something that I try to help people kind of vet out their therapist prior to going to them. And there's different things that you can ask them, different questions that I feel is very important. And I will say too, like if you've been to pelvic floor therapy and all they have you do is do Kegels or hook you up to a biofeedback machine, we need to find a new one, because that is like an old school method and that actually can stir up more issues than what it can actually help. But pain with intimacy can really be helped and resolved pretty quickly. And it goes in from the physical perspective, the emotional perspective, all of that. And even when I work with couples, whether they're experiencing infertility prior to even conceiving one child, all the way to people that have been that have had either recurrent losses or secondary infertility, if they have some type of pain with intercourse, sometimes that is the one barrier to them conceiving. Because, from a Catholic lens, we want this intimacy to be free and fruitful, and we want to feel very connected and safe and supported by our spouse during intimacy. And sometimes, yes, we can love our husbands and there's nothing going on there, but sometimes it can still bring up, if we had like a really bad day, a stressful day, we're mad at him for a reason, whatever it may be. And then we have, intercourse that night, but it doesn't feel like that true intimate intercourse. That is enough for our bodies to kind of feel like threatened or unsafe during that time. So that there in itself can be a huge barrier to resolving that pain and that trauma too. And so I've been reading this book called See Through Marriage, and I'm like, oh my gosh, every couple needs to read this, because it just goes through how to be very vulnerable and, with yourself, and your relationship with God, but then also your relationship with your spouse. And if there's any barriers there, or things that are hidden, or things that have been unsaid, that can create a lot of barrier, and can be I think it can be a kind of a hurdle when we're trying to resolve different traumas as well. So, again, that kind of goes through all of those things. But again, from a physical perspective, please reach out to a pelvic therapist. We can be incredibly useful. You can be, and a lot of people will say, I wish I would have done this sooner. I wish I would have known about this sooner. And we just have to essentially just have that courage and that vulnerability to reach out for help. And that is okay, because you're not alone. They say 1 in 4 women, but I think it's even more like 1 in 3 women experience, pelvic pain, some type of pelvic floor dysfunction and pain with intimacy. And it's common. So, and it's not something normal, no matter what your doctors tell you, like, oh, it's normal to have some pain with, intercourse, just go drink some wine and relax. That's kind of terrible advice. So, it's definitely common, but it's not normal.
Oh, I love all of that, especially that last part that you just said, because I have heard that from clients before, is that their doctor just told them to like go drink some wine and relax. And it's like, that's not helpful or effective, really. Just before we jump into any Q&A, really quick, what does it look like to work with a pelvic floor therapist?
Very good question. I love that. So that can look probably a little bit different for each person, and depending on what kind of pelvic therapist that you see. But so working with the pelvic therapist, first of all, in Ohio, at least I'm in Ohio, you do not need a doctor's order. So most states, you do not need a doctor's order. You don't need to go to your doctor first. You don't need their permission, because some doctors will say, oh, you don't need that. Or like, oh, we'll just do surgery for that. You can definitely reach out to a pelvic therapist without a doctor's order. I'm pretty sure all 50 states have direct access, but there might be a few states that you may need it. So don't quote me on that if you're outside of Ohio. Some depend on your insurance. Some insurances require you to have a referral. Most do not anymore. And actually, a lot of pelvic therapists are getting out of the insurance world, because the insurance is they dictate a lot of what we can and can't do, which also hinders your care. We personally don't take insurance except Medicare, because we legally have to, but because I want to be able to treat you as a whole person. And I don't want to be limited of what your insurance says we can and cannot do. And then, so when you come in, I really just kind of listen to your story. For me personally, I listen to your story, listen to what your current things are going on and what kind of complaints that you have. And then I'm asking all the way back to, sometimes linking it back to your birth with your mom, if you know anything about that, because that is a key component to what is going on today, from what my training is. And really, that first day is really listening to you, and asking what you want to achieve, what your goals are. And I usually, not on the first day, like I have training to do an internal pelvic assessment to see kind of what those muscles are doing, how the organs feel, those kinds of things. Not all pelvic therapists have training for internal assessments. I feel that it's a very valid thing to have a true, really good assessment. However, if you do not want an internal assessment, you can decline 100%. We don't never need to do that. I never do a pelvic assessment on anybody that's had any type of trauma, until we build that trust in each other, and you feel 110% confident and comfortable in the space, because there's still a lot we can do without that. And then we go through some different, I do some different manual techniques, that's all very gentle. We go through different movements and exercises. I do a whole body approach. So I do a lot of that women's health coaching. I pull that in there. What's our lifestyle like? What's our stress management like? What is your sleep routine like? Those kinds of things, work-life balance, and help coach through that. and give recommendations and different like homework, I should say, like recommendations of what you can be doing at home. I typically see my clients once every few weeks. I'm happy to see more often, but I also want to be very mindful of people's times and financial stipulations as well. So what you do on your own at home is going to be way more impactful in between our sessions than just working one-on-one specifically. And so I really believe that we individually know our bodies best, and we know we have that power to heal. We just need to be given some of those resources. So I'm always asking, well, what do you think? What do you think your body needs? Because I may say your body needs this, but you're like, no, that doesn't feel right. I think this is kind of where I need to go. We always want to make listening to you of what your body needs. Again, there's so much different types of trainings out there. Pelvic therapy, pelvic health therapy is not a branded term or anything, so anybody can use that term. I've seen personal trainers call themselves pelvic floor, experts. And so that can, stir some things up too, depending on what's going on as well. So just being cautious of, making sure we're vetting out who we're seeing and making sure you're feeling comfortable with what they're doing, what they're saying. And if you don't, trust your gut, and, we can help find somebody else.
Yeah, I know for me, before I went to a pelvic floor therapist, I had zero clue what it was.
Mm-hmm.
And again, this was years ago, but it was like not a clue. And then after I went, it was like every person should have access to this, especially after they have a baby, because it was so helpful. All right. Now we want to turn it over to you, ladies. Do you have any questions or comments or anything that you wanted to say?
I can ask a question. So I did go to a pelvic floor physical therapist. They were super recommended by my chiropractor and a couple other people, but I think they were more of like a great physical therapist, and they said that they knew pelvic floor, which I had no idea. I didn't know if I had any pelvic floor issues. I didn't have pain, but I had kind of like a traumatic C-section and like deep tissue bruising and stuff like that. But I didn't have any like pain, and I still don't. And I don't know if I ever really had any pelvic floor issues. And I went to that appointment and I was still in a lot of pain at that time and very numb. And so I left kind of feeling like, oh, she didn't know anything, or maybe I don't have any issues. So so my question is, how can you kind of know if you have any issues? Like if you don't have pain, but
Mm-hmm.
like I also have some numbness from my C-section and stuff like that, so I might not feel it, does that make sense?
Yeah. So after a C-section, we definitely can still have pelvic floor dysfunction. Many people feel like, oh, you had a C-section, you shouldn't have any pelvic floor issues. I'm like, yeah, actually you can. I mean, people that don't even have babies have pelvic floor dysfunction. Kids have pelvic floor dysfunctions. So typical common things with pelvic floor is if you have any incontinence, leakage, urinary leakage, if you have frequency of urination where you feel like you're peeing every hour, or if you feel like you have a small bladder. You can also have like UTI-like symptoms. If there's any burning with urination, those kinds of things. You could have constipation. Ideally, we should be pooping 1 to 2 times a day. We shouldn't have to strain to poop. And so many people tell me, I'm not constipated, but yet they have to take magnesium in order to poop, and they're only pooping once every 2 days. I'm like, that's not a normal thing. And so we want to be able to have 1 to 2 easy bowel movements every day, ideally. And obviously, if you're traveling or your schedule kind of gets screwed up a little bit, and you might go a couple days, like that's more of a situational thing. But we can still have tailbone pain, hip pain, low back pain. We can have TMJ and jaw pain and upper like neck pain, and that can still be coming from the pelvic floor. And also C-section wise, if you're having some of that numbness, depending on how long ago your C-section was, we can still do a lot of work to help decrease that numbness, and a lot of manual work. I do integrative dry needling, I do red light therapy and some cupping, deep abdominal visceral work, depending on how far out you are. Because it can also affect your digestion. If you have, like, say irritable bowel syndrome, if you have digestive issues, if you have bloating, that can be considered some pelvic issues. And also too, looking at our C-section, sometimes we call it like a C-section shelf, and where it's like, I can't get rid of this shelf here, and we feel like we need to lose weight, when in reality, we just need to work on that fascia tissue, and get our abdominals firing appropriately, get our diaphragm firing appropriately, getting our breath firing appropriately. And a lot of times that shelf kind of just magically goes away, and we didn't even lose a pound. And our clothes fit better too. Like, we don't necessarily need to lose the weight, and most of us don't need to lose the weight. We just need to work on the fascia component, the muscles, our breath work, and things like that. And so those are things that we look at. And again, every pelvic therapist is different. Anybody can call themselves a pelvic therapist. I have people that say, I'm a pelvic health expert, and they've never had any training. They're just a mom of 3 kids, and they just tell people how to exercise. So it's a hard area to be in. But if you felt like unheard or uncomfortable, or, whatever, with this therapist, you could always go back and say, hey, like, listen, like, I've been doing some research. I listened to somebody talk, whatever. This is some more questions I have, and kind of see what she says, or we can find a new one. That's kind of up to you. But those are some things. And then also too, if you decide that you do want to have more children, one of the big things I talk about is really doing some good manual abdominal visceral work on that scar. And not everybody has that training, so we'd have to kind of look at that. Because C-sections can create into secondary infertility things going on because of decreased blood flow and oxygen to those reproductive organs, different fascia restrictions, and that can create some issues as well. And depending what our cycles are like, if your cycle is returned and you're having irregular cycles or painful periods, a lot of heavy bleeding, or those kinds of things, just some cycle irregularities, I would look at the C-section scarring just to kind of see, what does it feel like? And we can do a lot of abdominal work to help regulate your cycle, amongst other things too. So hopefully that helps.
Yes, thank you.
Does anyone have any other questions or comments or anything like that? All right. Well, Trina, do you have anything else that you wanted to add before we finish up? Maybe how can people work with you? Or I know you said that you can help people find PTs in their area.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah.
Yeah. So, a final thing too is just always know that you're not alone. There's help out there, so don't be afraid to ask for help. And depending on what your story is, I always encourage a lot of my clients to share your story. Because if it's been a traumatic story and you've overcome some things, or whatever it may be, sharing your story, just having that vulnerability and that courage to do that can just be incredibly powerful, not only for your healing journey, but you can help so many other women. I can think of so many of them right now. I'm like, gosh, sharing your story, you can be a light for so many other women. And here we are, we really just sometimes lack the community, and we really just need to find our people, have that community, be willing to, we can still share our story and still have a little bit of privacy too. That is just incredibly important, and just continuing, just advocating for yourself and for others, and being a light. And that's really, and just sharing God's work that he does in your life. Working with people, I primarily work in person, one-on-one, just because I value that hands-on, intimate manual and intimate approach. Will do virtual consults as well if you have any questions in regards to just whole person health. I have an Instagram, and it is Dr. I can't even remember now. Dr. Trina Winner, I think it is. And then on Facebook, it's just my name, Trina Winner. And then our website for our business, my husband and I actually run our physical therapy and wellness business, is winningedgetherapy.com. And so you can also inquire through our website as well.
Nice. Love this so much. I just want to leave everybody with like one final thought, and that is something that is like, you know it, but it's hard to just like feel it sometimes. But that is just that your body was beautifully made and wonderfully made, and that you are good. And just no matter where you are in your healing journey, whether like you are perfectly healed, which we're fallen humans, so I'm not sure if that's ever the case on earth, or whether it's like you don't even know where to start. Just remember, like, healing isn't about forgetting what happened, but it's about finding a way to move forward by feeling supported, by being at peace, having strength, everything like that. So again, if there's even like an inkling of something that resonated with you today and you're like, I need help, whether that be with PT, whether that be with like birth trauma, I would really just encourage you to reach out to either of us, because it really is possible for you to feel at ease. And that just means like that you don't need to constantly have decompression time, whether that be looking at your phone or staring out into the abyss, like mindless. It's possible to feel whole again and to just have a peaceful presence instead of snapping or yelling at your kids. So just really know that there is so much more for you. God has in store for you, and he just really wants you to embrace it and move forward with his design. So thank you again for being here.
Thank you.
I will send an email with this recording out. And Trina, if you have anything that you want me to email out as well, let me know. I'm going to probably send out the Holistic Women's Health Assessment.
Yeah.
I'm all about, because I feel like this Holistic Women's Health Assessment is just this really great like baseline, and then just to check in with yourself to see how you're doing in certain areas of your life. And then you can look back at it if you do it in a month or two later on, just to see like where things changed or shifted and how you can really continue to keep striving for that perfection. But yeah, if anybody has any questions or anything like that, please reach out to us. And thanks again.
Thank you.
All right. Well, have a good day. And actually, go ahead. I forgot. All right. Let me stop the recording.